Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when someone carries the weight of a crown that never came and still acts with more dignity than any king who ever stepped foot on that throne? Rhaenys Targaryen was never a background character. Never. From the very first moment she appeared in House of the Dragon, she carried with her an aura that few fantasy characters can sustain. That of someone who lost everything she deserved, and even so never turned bitter, never bent, never begged. And in the second season, in a scene that lasted minutes but will last years in the memory of everyone who watched it, Rhaenys delivered what may be, without exaggeration, the most impactful moment in the entire series so far. But before we get there, I need to tell you who she really is, because without context, you won't feel the weight of that moment the way it deserves to be felt. Rhaenys Targaryen was born with everything, daughter of Aemond Targaryen, granddaughter of King Jaehaerys I. She was the most direct heir to the Iron Throne when her father died. The blood running through her veins was real. The claim was legitimate, but the Great Council of 101 AC decided that a woman could not sit on the Iron Throne and chose Viserys, her cousin, instead. Think about that for a second. A room full of lords from across the entire kingdom debating the future of Westeros. And in the end, the conclusion was simple and brutal. It doesn't matter the blood, it doesn't matter the competence, it doesn't matter the lineage. She's a woman, so she won't do. They called her the Queen Who Never Was. And the cruelty of that nickname isn't in what it says, it's in what it implies. That she made it all the way to the edge of the throne, that everyone knew she was the best option, and she was still passed over. The nickname doesn't deny her legitimacy, it confirms it and discards her anyway. That's the kind of wound that doesn't go away. You don't forget something like that, you learn to carry it. And Rhaenys carried it for decades. Alongside Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, she built a life, a family, a position. She lost children, lost grandchildren, lost parts of herself that never came back, but she never lost her clarity. She is the smartest character in the series, not the most powerful, not the one with the biggest dragon, the smartest. Because Rhaenys always saw things as they were, not as people wished they would be. When Rhaenyra declared her war, Rhaenys already knew the cost. When Daemon spoke of easy victory, Rhaenys was already counting the dead who didn't yet have names. She wasn't a pessimist, she was lucid, and there's an enormous difference between the two. The second season of House of the Dragon arrived with a dangerous promise to show the true horror of the Dance of the Dragons. Not the romanticized war, not dragons soaring beautifully into a sunset, real war, with blood, betrayal, and irreversible consequences. And just a few episodes in, the series fulfilled that promise in a way nobody saw coming. The Battle of Rook's Rest. If you've seen it, you know. If you haven't, pay close attention, because this changes everything. Rhaenys and her dragon meleys were sent to defend Rook's Rest, a castle under siege by the Green forces. The mission seemed straightforward, but Aegon II and Aemond had a trap waiting. And when Vhagar entered that battlefield, the situation became painfully clear. This wasn't a battle, it was a planned execution. Meleys was powerful, but Vhagar was the largest living dragon in Westeros, the largest since Balerion, the Black Dread. And with Aemond, cold, calculating, and merciless, in the saddle, the odds were almost non-existent. The confrontation was brutal. Meleys fought with everything she had. Rhaenys rode with the precision of a warrior who had spent her entire life proving she deserved to be exactly where she was. But in the end, Vhagar brought them both down. And here, right here, is where the series does something extraordinary. The camera doesn't look away, doesn't cut to another character, doesn't use Rhaenys' death as dramatic backdrop for someone else's scene. It stays there, with her. There's a moment, seconds before the end, when Rhaenys and Meleys are falling, and the direction chooses to show her face. Not fear, not despair, absolute determination. She knew, she always knew this could be the last mission, and she went anyway. Because it wasn't about winning, it was about what you do with the time you have left, about which causes are worth the price you pay. Rhaenys didn't die trying to seize the throne for herself. She never wanted that, or at least she had long learned not to. She died defending a principle that cost her more than it cost anyone else in that war. The idea that a woman can and should lead.
Think about that carefully. The woman who was cast aside for being a woman, who spent her entire life watching less capable men occupy the space that was rightfully hers, in the end chose to die for the cause of another woman having what she never got to have. There is no more complete character arc. There simply isn't. Eve Best, the actress who plays Rhaenys, delivered a performance that goes far beyond what the script asked for her. She didn't need grand speeches, didn't need dramatic crying or cries of heroism. All it took was the look. There's a specific, rare talent that some actors possess, the ability to make silence speak louder than any dialogue. Eve Best has that in industrial quantities. In every scene Rhaenys appeared throughout both seasons, you knew exactly what was going through her mind without her needing to say a single word. The slightly furrowed brow, the posture that never bent, the smile that was at once warm and distant, like someone who had gone too far to be easily fooled. In her final scene, that reaches its peak. With an absolute minimum of expressive resources, she conveys an entire lifetime of weight, choice, and peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from happiness, but from resolution, from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for. That's not something you learn in an acting class. That comes from deeply understanding a human being.
But Rhaenys' death isn't just an emotional moment. It's a narrative turning point that shifts the balance of everything in House of the Dragon. With meleys dead, the Blacks lose one of their most experienced and most feared dragons. With Rhaenys dead, Rhaenyra loses her most honest advisor, the one who was never afraid to say what nobody wanted to hear. Corlys Velaryon loses his wife, and if you followed their journey together, you know that underneath all the coldness and ambition of that marriage, there was a real partnership, forged through losses only the two of them ever shared. The void left by Rhaenys' death isn't just emotional, it's strategic, it's political. It's the kind of absence you only fully understand when it's already too late. And that's the point House of the Dragon has been getting consistently right in its second season. Every death matters. Every loss carries real weight. There's no protagonist armor here. No guarantee of survival just because a character is beloved by the audience. Game of Thrones, at its peak, did that. House of the Dragon is doing it again, and Rhaenys' death is the clearest proof of that so far. There's an earlier scene, back in the first season, that stayed burned in everyone's memory. Rhaenys at Viserys' deathbed, when she looks at Alicent and delivers that line about women building the dreams of men. That wasn't a political monologue, it was a diagnosis. A woman who had spent her entire life navigating a system that rejected her, explaining the rules of that system to another woman who still believed she could change it from the inside. Rhaenys was right. She was always right. And that's what makes the second season even more impactful when it comes to her. The series doesn't let you forget who Rhaenys was before sending her to the battlefield. You won't watch that final scene without carrying the full weight of everything that came before. That is quality writing. It's not coincidence. It's deliberate character construction across seasons, paid off at the exact moment it hurts the most. Coming back to the scene itself, there's a detail that a lot of people might have missed, but that says a great deal about how the direction thought through this moment. When Rhaenys and meleys fall, the music stops. There's no dramatic score building to the climax, no orchestra swelling to tell you how you're supposed to feel. There's silence, and within that silence, the raw sound of impact, fire, and destruction. That's a brave choice. Most productions rely too heavily on the soundtrack to carry the emotional weight of their scenes. House of the Dragon decided to trust the audience, decided that you, watching, already had everything you needed to feel that moment without being led by the hand. And it worked. Because when the music finally returned, slow, almost hesitant, you were already emotionally wrecked. The Dance of the Dragons in Game of Thrones lore is described as one of the greatest tragedies in Targaryen history. Not because the Targaryens lost, but because everyone lost, on both sides. Every dragon killed was a power that would never return. Every life lost was part of a legacy shattering apart.
Rhaenys represents that better than any other character. She didn't belong absolutely to either side of this war. She belonged to an idea that Westeros could be different, could recognize merit regardless of gender, could learn from its own mistakes. The war killed her before that idea ever had a chance to prove itself. And maybe that's the darkest commentary House of the Dragon is making. The most capable people, the most clear-eyed, the ones who could most change the course of things, rarely survive long enough to see their vision realized. It's a pattern that real history repeats with a deeply unsettling consistency. Eve Best has said in interviews that she knew from the very beginning of the process that Rhaenys would meet this end. She built the character's journey with that destination in mind, and that explains a great deal about how she constructed every single scene. There was no unnecessary urgency, no despair where it didn't belong. There was an underlying serenity to everything, like someone who had learned to live fully within limitations they never chose. That is the definition of dignity, and it's what makes Rhaenys one of the most extraordinary characters television has produced in recent years. Not for powers, not for victories, but for the way she refused to be diminished by what the world tried to do to her. So what are we left with after all of this? We're left with the question Rhaenys spent her whole life answering in different ways, and that House of the Dragon has the courage to leave open. If the system was always built to exclude, what exactly are you defending when you fight for it? Rhaenys chose to fight anyway. Not for the system, but for the person, for the idea, for what could be different from what had always been. She was the queen who never was until the very end, and maybe that's exactly why she is the most real, most human, and most unforgettable character in this entire story. But here's the question that won't leave your mind. If Rhaenys had sat on the Iron Throne in 101 AD, if the Council had made the right choice that day, would the Dance of the Dragons have happened at all?